on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, listeners to WMAL in the O'Connor and Company universe. Yes, this is O'Connor and Company. Larry O'Connor returns tomorrow. I'm Andrew Langer in for Larry today. I will be back on New Year's Day, by the way. All will be quiet on New Year's Day. I am sitting alongside Julie Gunlock. Good morning, Julie.
Good morning.
5 shopping days left until Christmas, so if you haven't gotten anything, you got to get into gear. We're going to be joined in a couple of minutes by Hans von Spakovsky to talk about this situation that has arisen out of Colorado, because that's just what this election needed, was a state court kicking Donald Trump off the ballot. In the meantime, we talked yesterday about the Jimmy Lai situation in Hong Kong, or in China, the trial starting yesterday. Joining us right now is Gordon Chang. He's a China expert. He is Distinguished Senior Fellow at the Gatestone Institute, author of The Great U.S.-China Tech War. You can find him on the Twitter machine at Gordon G. Chang. I know, Julie, you've got all kinds of questions for Gordon. Knock it out of the park.
Yeah, Gordon, I'm so thrilled to talk to you, and I'd love your general thoughts on this trial and what you expect to see. But I also want to hear your thoughts. Jimmy Lai escaped China as a boy. He was granted British citizenship in 1996, yet the Chinese government doesn't recognize this. Has Jimmy received a consular visit since he was jailed in 2020?
I believe that he has, but China has been restricting access to Jimmy, who's held in Stanley Prison, which is a maximum security facility on the southern part of Hong Kong Island. And Jimmy has, I think every day, though, had praised the rosary with his wife. So he has had the most important contact that he feels he needs. But what we really need to do is get Jimmy Lai out of jail, because this is a trumped-up trial. It's a show trial. And clearly the Chinese have already proclaimed him guilty, as we hear from foreign ministry statements almost every day.
Well, let's back up a little bit. Maybe you could give our listeners sort of a brief summary of what he's charged with, what they say he did, and what he's facing.
Yeah, he's now facing 2 charges under the national security law, which was Beijing imposed on Hong Kong. And the 2 charges are colluding with foreign forces, and the other one is conspiring to publish seditious material. He was the publisher of Apple Daily, which was the main paper in Hong Kong, which was very pro-democracy, which certainly irritated the Chinese authorities, and which they closed after a series of raids. Now, Jimmy himself, as you point out, was born in the mainland. He escaped to Hong Kong. He started a fabulously successful clothing store, Giordano, which had many branches in China, which eventually Jimmy sold Giordano because he was making pro-democracy statements. The Beijing authorities were certainly pressuring him, and he has already been in jail. Today is the 1,083rd day that Jimmy has been in jail in Hong Kong on other charges. Again, charges which were made up.
It is astounding to me, this situation. I mean, listen, remember, there are movie plots literally that are about this idea of folks fleeing totalitarianism, totalitarian regimes, going back and being captured and having their alternative citizenship denied. I mean, Gordon, let's talk Turkey about what's been going on in Hong Kong since the Chinese took it over. Obviously, it is a shell of its former glorious self. Talk about that.
Yes. Well, in 1984, China and Britain signed a treaty, the Joint Declaration, which promised Hong Kong 50 years of a high degree of autonomy under the one country, two systems formula from 1997, when Britain handed it over, as they say, to China. China has reneged on the Sino-British Joint Declaration specifically and clearly. And clearly they have also not honored its terms because they have, especially starting in 2020, taken over administration of Hong Kong and now run it directly in violation of their promises. And this is had so many reverberations, one of them being, as you say, people have been leaving Hong Kong, businesses have been leaving Hong Kong, and it is not as vibrant as it once was. You know, it once was an international financial center. It is now on its way to being a local financial center for China only, because foreign businesses are concerned about staying there, and they have been leaving.
Tell us a little bit more. You touched on this about his conversion to Catholicism and his deep faith, which, as you mentioned, has really sustained him. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. In Catholicism, martyrdom is an important element, and Jimmy could have left Hong Kong, but he decided to stay and to continue to advocate for pro-democracy causes, and because of that, he has become a symbol. And at the same time, the authorities have moved to imprison Cardinal Zen. And so he's on trial as well, though Cardinal Zen is on bail. They wouldn't put Jimmy on bail. Right now, you have an attack on the Catholic Church and on faith in general in Hong Kong. And that, of course, mirrors what's been going on in the mainland for quite some time. You know, it's not just against Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other Turkic minorities. It's also against Christians and even Buddhists. Although Buddhism is thought to be in China a homegrown religion, nonetheless, they are going after all forms of faith. And Jimmy and Cardinal Zen have really been the most prominent in Hong Kong of that persecution.
We're talking with Gordon Chang. He's a distinguished senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute. Gordon, real quick, because I want folks to understand this. Again, I have a very limited knowledge of how the Chinese criminal justice system works. I know that's a contradiction in terms, but talk a little bit about how this trial differs from what can Americans understand that makes Chinese criminal justice and these trials different from the American criminal justice system.
Jimmy's been denied bail. He's been denied his first choice of lawyer. As I mentioned, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has been issuing propaganda releases saying how he's guilty. And so really what this is a Communist Party determined campaign to put Jimmy Lai in jail for the rest of his life. By the way, he just turned 76. And so this is, as you point out, the opposite of justice.
Right.
Gordon,
Julie.
I know at this time when Jimmy's facing trial like this, you and I probably equally miss our friend Claudia Rosette, our late friend Claudia Rosette, who would have been all over this. But I am so thrilled that you are here to keep us updated on this horrible situation. And I hope people look into this and follow this trial. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Julie, and thank you, Andrew.
You're welcome. Listen, Gordon, we have to leave it there. Gordon Chang, he is a distinguished senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute. Merry Christmas to you, good sir.
Yeah, Merry Christmas and a safe New Year to both of you.
Amen.
WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
Live
From the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
Oh, my goodness. Julie, you know, it's one of these things. I actually have a cousin who taught at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. I don't believe it was I think it was before the shooting took place down there a few years back. But this school can't seem to be cut a break as well. This is a crazy story. 5 teenagers between the ages of 15 and 17 were charged this week with felony battery in the savage mob beating of a male student at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. The shooting happened in 2018. A shocking video of the brutal fight shows an unidentified male teenager getting jumped by multiple teenagers and pummeling him. This is the horrendous thing. One of the teenagers is seen lifting the victim over his shoulder before slamming him headfirst into the concrete, fracturing his skull. I mean, this is just horrifying. And this, of course, coming on the heels of another savage beating in a high school in Las Vegas, in which a group of teenagers are charged with second-degree murder in the death of a 17-year-old. I mean, you know, as the world burns elsewhere, we have to remember that there is stuff happening in these in these high schools. I mean, your thoughts here, Julie.
My thoughts are this is directly because of restorative justice practices that were sort of deployed into a nation's schools
Right.
during the Obama administration. And this conveys a message that there's really no punishment. This is all part of this school to prison pipeline that Obama popularized.
Right.
And the Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan at the time, said, oh, we need to tackle this. So we need to decrease the number of detentions and expulsions and actual punishment for children who do this, who disrespect their teachers or act out or commit crimes in schools. And now you've had, a decade of this, almost 2 decades of this. And now kids, there is no discipline.
Right.
They can do whatever they want.
We were working steadily. Listen, I remember that, the 1950s and 1960s and into the 1970s in the inner cities, right, America's cities, we would have these problems. But, all of a sudden you're seeing at places like Lawrence, Massachusetts, or Kilauea, Kona in Hawaii, a 15-year-old autistic teenager was beaten so severely in a high school stairwell that he was hospitalized. And now, of course, this story out of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. And I think you're absolutely correct here. It is a situation in which all of the tools that were made available to administrators to deal with these things, and this is, the administrators themselves, to some extent the teachers, have been taken away from them in the names of, again, right, Julie, as we've been talking about, the performative aspects of leftist culture. We're gonna do things that we're gonna say are gonna solve problems, but is there anything worse, Julie? No, I'm sorry. There are a lot of things that are worse. I'm being hyperbolic here. But one of the great problems we have in America is that we enact public policies. We go down the road of enacting public policies that have nothing to do with solving the problem. And even when you confront officials, they say, well, we know it's not going to solve the problem that we're trying to address, but we have to be seen as doing something, and that's not the right answer.
Yeah, what's particularly galling is this happened in Parkland where, because of restorative justice practices,
right,
you had a school shooting there. And I wrote about this at the time, that that shooter at the time had been given so many free passes. He had assaulted,
right,
he had sexually assaulted young girls, he had attacked teachers. There were so many warnings, and every single time, I mean, how many social workers had gone out to that kid's school? How many police calls have been made about that kid? And every time they employed some sort of, let's chat about this. Let's have a restorative justice circle where we talk about it and we don't actually, pursue any actual discipline. So Parkland obviously hasn't learned anything, and we're going to see more videos like this. We're going to see more beatings. We're going to see more teens acting out like this. We've already seen it. I've seen it right here in Alexandria, Virginia, where there was an entire Instagram account dedicated to the incredible fights and group fights.
That's where I was going with this. Was this issue of, and social media certainly doesn't help,
right? Because
all of a sudden someone blows up on social media. Maybe I shouldn't use that term, for engaging in one of these fights. That is, again, it rewards the wrong impulses in our young people, and we shouldn't be doing that. Listen, we've got so much more to get to right now. It's 8:22 on WMAL. Julie, are you familiar? I don't know if Julie's familiar with this this concept of the street takeover. That's this idea of people getting together in cars or scooters and essentially mobbing the streets. You familiar with this, Julie?
Yeah, I am.
There was a big one in Colorado Springs in which people were injured. But there was, this past weekend was a massive, 5 people were crushed after they hung out of an SUV during a street takeover in Colorado Springs. This past weekend, there were takeovers in like a dozen different cities in the United States. I've seen them here in Washington, D.C. I got woken up one night with a scooter. I know it sounds weird and it sounds like I'm complaining, but a scooter takeover on 16th Street, which is super, super loud. Well, we've seen it all over the place. I mean, you get folks who will stop in traffic and shut down the Chesapeake Bay Bridge to take those things over. They do it on the Beltway. Something's got to be done about it. Listen, when we come back, we're going to be joined by Hans von Spakovsky. We're going to talk about the Colorado Supreme Court. 4 Democrats tossing Donald Trump from the ballot. What can be done there? This, of course, is O'Connor and Company. The station is WMAL. It is 8:30.
WMAL-FM, Woodbridge, Washington, a Cumulus media station.
Making sense of the news.
News Talk 105.9.
News now
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
5 shopping days left until Christmas. And you know what that means, Julie Gunlock?
What does that mean?
It means I'm getting punchy. I'm just getting punchy here. Anyway, it's 8:37 here on News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Making sense of the news. Happy Wednesday to everybody. Yes, by the way, tomorrow, shortest day of the year, start of winter, so just be careful for that. This is O'Connor and Company. Larry returns tomorrow. In the meantime, you still got me, Andrew Langer, alongside Julie Gunlock. I will be back on New Year's Day. All won't be quiet on New Year's Day, contrary to what Bono sings. Joining us right now, very, very important story. The story of the day, possibly at the end of the year, the story of the year. Julie, is that overstating it, that it's the story of the year?
No, not
okay.
at all.
Not overstating it. Okay. Joining us is Hans von Spakovsky. He is the Heritage Foundation election law expert. He's a former commissioner on the Federal Election Commission. Hans, I mean, unprecedented. We know how this is going to end up, right? We know the Supreme Court. Well, we don't know. We can't guarantee, but we are reasonably certain the Supreme Court is going to put Donald Trump back on the ballot here. Nevertheless, this is unprecedented what's been done. Talk about the unprecedented nature of this move by the Colorado Supreme Court.
Well, Andrew, Julie, good morning. It's the ultimate example of judicial arrogance. Yeah. I mean, you had, by the way, it's a 4-3 decision. So in essence, you had 4 judges telling the 4.5 million registered voters in Colorado, guess what? We're not going to let you decide who you think should be the president of the United States. And the way they did it in this long opinion, frankly, is by thumbing their nose at and defying the U.S. Supreme Court, some of its precedent, and substituting their judgment for Congress. And I'll give you 2 quick examples of this.
Please.
All right. Look, Section 3, which is the provision of the 14th Amendment they're trying to use to disqualify the president for supposedly engaging in insurrection, it only applies to Donald Trump if, and this is the language from Section 3, if he was previously an officer of the United States. Now, most people think, oh, well, he was president, he was officer of the United States.
Right.
Wrong. They're wrong. The Supreme Court has on multiple occasions, the last time just in 2010, said an officer of the United States is someone who was appointed to the federal government, not somebody who was elected. And the easiest way to understand it is Joe Biden's not an officer of the U.S., neither was Donald Trump. Merrick Garland, he is an officer of the U.S. Why? Because he was appointed and then confirmed by the Senate. And so what does the Colorado court do? They just pass over the fact the Supreme Court's already decided this issue and say, oh, no. Donald Trump, he was an officer of the U.S., so this provision applies to him. And then they say, oh, yeah, he was guilty of insurrection. Well, the House impeached him for insurrection. The article in the impeachment resolution that was approved in January 2021 said that he had engaged in incitement of insurrection. Well, what happened in the U.S. Senate? He was acquitted.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, a lot of constitutional scholars, I'm one of them, say that Section 3 doesn't really even exist legally anymore because there were 2 amnesty acts passed in the late 1800s. You can read the entire opinion by these 4 judges. They don't even mention those amnesty acts.
Hey, Hans, let me ask you this, because the other part of this is it doesn't just apply to Donald Trump being on the ballot, his name being on the ballot. They went and took the extra step and said, you can't write his name, and as Julie so accurately pointed out, I mean, that's just an astounding abuse of power, don't you think?
Oh, I agree. And what folks need to realize, look, even if you don't like Donald Trump, even if you don't want to be president, you ought to be upset by this because, like I said, you've got 4 judges taking away your ability to make this decision. And this has never happened in our entire history that I know of.
Well, you make a good point there. It's never happened in our history. What does this say about our influence around the world. I love that the president of El Salvador condemned this, and I just wonder about our ability to maintain our role as the leader of the free world when this kind of stuff happens.
Well, I agree, and I hate to say this, but this makes us look like a third world banana republic.
Yeah.
One in which the courts are used to go after political opponents. And look, I just don't see how the Supreme Court cannot take this case. And that's the only appeal, because remember, this was the Colorado State Supreme Court. So the only appeal is the U.S. Supreme Court. They've got to take this case because this isn't the only one. There are cases proceeding in multiple other states, including places like Michigan and Oregon, and the Supreme Court needs to take this case, hear it on an expedited basis, and quickly issue a decision because, listen, I used to be a county election official. Election officials are already out there starting to print the ballot, because the primaries are almost upon us.
That's exactly right. Well, listen, Hans, we have to leave it there. We're going to have to get you back to talk about this. Thank you so very much for joining us today. Merry Christmas to you, good sir.
Thanks. Same to you.
That's Hans von Spakovsky. He is an election law expert with the Heritage Foundation, former commissioner on the Federal Elections Commission. So much more to get to. Are less at risk for mental illness.
Yeah,
we're going to talk. Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry.
I was just going to say, this coming on the heels of the same day we have the Daily Caller releasing a story about how the federal government is engaging in a program which is accusing parents that don't want to accept the gender identity of their kids as being abusive. I mean, this is where we are here. We know that conservative households that don't make their kids anxious over every little thing in the world and don't cater to every little whim of their kids produces more mentally strong kids. And yet the federal government, the Biden administration, is going right at the core of this. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, no, even the people who are going to do this survey at the Brookings Institute are going to be like, this is just weird.
Yeah.
What could this be? It's just a gigantic mystery that parents who convey things like, you are the sex you were born, your race does not, the color of your skin doesn't make you a bad person, your dad and I will not get divorced, that God plays a role in your life, and that God loves you. Okay, I wouldn't have aborted you. Okay,
Yes.
These are concepts and certainty, truth, that certain things are true and certain things are false. And it's not this just like, it's like the world is not Oprah's Your Truth. The world is made up of good things and bad things and true and false. And this is what conservative parents convey to their kids. And that results in mentally healthy kids.
Right. And adding to this, the concept of self-reliance. Are your friends with her? I know her, Lenore Skenazy. The whole concept of free-range parenting gets into this idea of getting kids to think for themselves and do more for themselves, giving them the freedom to act on their own behalf. And the other part of this is also teaching kids not to freak out over everything, right? If everything is a crisis, the climate is changing, Donald Trump is going to come and take you away, guns at school are just you're under attack. We shouldn't be living this way. I mean, I think I told you this story about a former friend, the parent of one of my daughter's younger one's friends. Put up on Facebook a couple of years ago, I was driving to the school and there was a car speeding away, and my daughter said, "Gee, Daddy, I hope there wasn't a school shooting."
First of all, when you go on Twitter and you say, my kid said, first of all, it's never true. Your kid never said that.
Yes.
Your kid was not reading the Communist Manifesto. Your kid was not like, none of this is ever true. But I wrote about this after the Trump election as well, about how parents were saying they were crying in their children's arms. And I was like, could we all be parents here?
Right.
There is a problem. And look, there is a problem, particularly with liberal white women, of passing on their own anxieties to their children, and liberal men letting this happen. These sort of, we've all seen these videos of, the the child who announces I'm a new sex. I've changed my gender, and the dad is sort of sitting there like a eunuch, not able to say anything, and the mom is all celebrating it. So yeah, we have a real problem with parenting culture in this country.
That's absolutely true. And I hope I'm going to be able to talk about this with you on your Bespoke Parenting podcast, Julie. I'm going to be joining you there. Very excited to talk about this. Parents who said my child does not get their way when we have a conflict. 80% of conservative parents said that they're actually parents in this regard. That their child does not get their way, compared to 53% for liberal and 55% for very liberal. So a huge difference there, and I think that gets into it. Right. Listen, in the end, my parenting philosophy is very simple and straightforward. You teach your kids about how the world works. You get them to start thinking for themselves. But you work to make the world make sense to them. If you make it so the world does not make sense to them, then invariably they're going to come off with a very confused, very anxious view of the world, right? This is how you produce kids that can't order things off of a menu. Isn't that right, Julie?
Yeah, we are really crippling a generation of kids. We are, as you pointed out too, we are also doing everything for them.
Right.
Kids are increasingly there was a great book a couple years out by Julie Lythcott-Hames called How to Raise an Adult, and she talked about in her 18 years as a dean of a major university, she saw the kids